When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. Agata Dela Cruz is my guest today, and she is not someone who has worked professionally with kids. I know. You're thinking, why is she on the show then, James? You promised us experts. Well, she's got her own expertise and her own experience that she's very good at sharing. She's a full-time working mom. She's a first-time parent, and she's got a toddler. So she's right in there learning and growing with him. And the way she's able to tell her story is clearly applying everything that she's learning. It's nice. She's done a lot of homework. She's learned a lot, and the way she's able to tell her story of how she has applied what she's learned, it's personal, and she's relatable, and she's just great at sharing her story. So today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about growth mindset and how that applies to the parent and how it applies to the child. Talk about what it means to hold space and how we choose and connect with therapists, and just all kinds of interesting things. If you're curious and interested in self-awareness and emotional well-being, join her community of other like-minded parents and individuals on her very artistic Instagram page called Tanos Mom. That's at TANOS_MOM. So now here's my wonderful conversation with Agata Dela Cruz. Okay, Agata Dela Cruz, welcome to Getting Kids to Listen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So you're here to talk about your relationship with your son and the work you do with him to help him out with his mindset and such. What is it that you love most about working with him and working on all these different areas?
I think it's the idea that, by all means, I'm not a professional. I'm just a mom that's learning along the way, just like a lot of other parents. My son is my first child, so nobody handed me a manual when I came out of the hospital. And there's so many things as a parent that you go through, challenges of when your child isn't speaking yet, and you're trying to decipher and understand, how you can meet their needs. Through that process, I have been able to learn so much about human behavior, human needs, and just even about myself, my own triggers, my own challenges that I face sometimes when we are living these kind of crazy lives and trying to get a lot done and trying to meet the needs of really, really small people. So that's what I love about it, is my son has pushed me so far in better understanding myself and just better understanding humans. So that is one of the reasons that I run my Instagram account. I share my journey with other people. And by all means, I don't try to be, come across as the expert. I'm just sharing the resources and the experiences that I'm having along the way.
I think that's great. Hey, I don't even have kids, and here I am doing this. So what's the main thing you think that you've learned from working with him?
It would be connection. So some of the sort of areas that I really love to focus on and I find fascinating is about emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence being that I myself went through a lot of challenges as a kid. And then I had a lot of anger and behavioral issues myself throughout life in my 20s. very destructive relationships with, boyfriends, with coworkers, and it didn't really make a very, happy life for me. And after I had my son, I realized, wow, there's a lot of these things that I don't want to pass on to him. I don't want him to struggle in life as much. And so this is what brought me onto the path of how to help my son become much more emotionally intelligent and be able to harness some of these different emotions instead of allowing them to drive us. Being in much more control and understanding what how these emotions can help us throughout life. And that's where the growth mindset also comes in, which is really helping to understand that just because of what you're facing doesn't mean it's something that you can't overcome. I love the expansiveness of growth mindset and how every single person really has the, talents and capabilities and potentials. But when I was growing up, I was never told this. This was never shared with me. It was sort of like you have innate traits and this is who you are and this is who you're going to be stuck with. And so that's the sort of journey that I've been on, is really learning that no, we can really change and alter how we think and we behave, but emotional intelligence and growth mindset are the foundations of that. And I would say the key way of being able to really understand children and even my own son is through connection. When we're able to connect, that's when we're able to open up and be much more open to emotions with small children.
How much were you already doing that type of work on emotional intelligence before having him, and how much of it was like the impetus of, oh, I have a kid now. Now I really have to get cracking, because I know a lot of people, they take their own emotional health seriously only when they have kids. So I'm wondering, yeah, how long you were kind of already in that beforehand.
So my my emotional intelligence was extremely low, I would say, even after the birth of my son. Um, I definitely had postpartum, and I didn't want to treat it by taking medication, so I really wrote it out. I was sort of in denial about it. So with sleep deprivation, going through those sort of ups and downs when you're in postpartum, I was extremely reactive. I was very angry. And I literally, if I'm just being really honest with everybody here, I wasn't having a really good time. I know people have children and it's an amazing experience. But for me, it felt a little bit like hell. And because of that approach and attitude, there was a lot of challenges in my marriage and in my other external relationships that were popping up that were making life even more challenging. And that was the wake up call for me that, wow, this is something that he is going to take on if I don't change and if I don't start working on myself. And so when he was about 6 months old is when I really started this whole entire journey. And the book recommendation that I received is something along the line of how to raise emotionally intelligent children. And that's the first time I really heard about even that term. And it really started opening up my eyes that so much of how we relate to children, how we speak to them, how we handle their challenges, their tantrums, their meltdowns, can have a cause effect on their mental and emotional well-being for the future. And I'm really pleased that I went through these challenges because I was already so open to that message. I think I myself, before this whole area, or before I was even pregnant, I thought it was perfect. Like there's nothing wrong with me. It's everybody else that has issues. And that was sort of the mindset. And I will say, going through and really educating myself, I was hungry to learn more. And that was sort of the beginning of how I started learning about it.
And the word connection, is that something that you were thinking about, or was that kind of new to the vocabulary as you did the emotional intelligence work? And what does that even mean? Is there a definition for that?
Yeah. So no, connection was not even in my vernacular. Um, the previous me would be very much about enforcing my way, very stubborn, very adamant, my way or the highway. That is not connection. That is the opposite of connection. Connection is when you and I could even be coming from two different perspectives, but we can agree that we're coming from two different perspectives. Human connection is when we can be compassionate, empathetic, and understand people on a much more human level. And it's just a different way to look at that. As human beings, we all need to feel connected. We all want love. We want compassion. We want to be accepted for who we are. And when we are able to create relationships with people, with our spouses, with our with teachers who teach our children, with our neighbors, with other people's children, and everybody's coming from so many different perspectives. But connection is what really truly holds us together. And it's something that is not, I would say, you don't just snap into connection. I still sometimes fail at being able to connect, but I continuously remind myself of what's important. So you're trying to move more into these feelings of compassion, empathy, open-mindedness when you're relating to people.
Okay. With a kid who's pre-verbal, I'm guessing he's got lots to say now, but for a long time that wasn't an option. Were you still thinking about connection? And I guess I'm wondering if the nonverbal stuff kind of applies across the board with people of all ages, or if there's a special
like a different approach.
There's a different approach with the infant.
To tell you honestly, when I first started learning and understanding about emotional intelligence, I thought it was about helping to broaden a child's vocabulary, which would be, understand what anger is, understand what sadness is, and be okay to feel those feelings. Because a lot of the time, and you see this in a lot of children's books and movies, and just, I would say, the American culture is be happy, 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 happy. And what that is doing is it's actually disqualifying the fact that we do feel anxious, that we do feel sad, that we feel angry. So when I began on this journey, it was about helping my son, who was pre-verbal, understand some of these words. And I did buy a bunch of books in different ways, being able also to share with him, like, hey, mommy's feeling actually pretty upset right now about X, even though he was nonverbal. As he started moving into age 2, which a lot of people who have toddlers understand, is they're starting to develop their prefrontal cortex, and that's when they're starting to create much more assertiveness. They want that sense of independence, and so sometimes the things that we are asking them to do, it's not something that they want to follow through, because they want to do things their way. And so what connection looks like is being able to acknowledge something that he does. Example of this would be, for instance, when I'm cooking, I'm making something on the stove, and he's pulling me. He wants me to go in the playroom and sit with him. The surefire way for me to get him into a meltdown is say, no, mommy's really busy right now. Like, please go in the front, and I'll come back when I have time. That's a sure way to disacknowledge of something that he wants, which is, mommy, I need you. I want your connection. I want your attention right now. I think for parents, we're trying to do a lot. And it can be very challenging to be able to constantly meet their needs. But one way I do is I actually I'll turn off the burner. I'll get down to his eye level, and I'll say, hey, you really want me to come down and sit with you? Well, can you come and sit with me? Do you want to come help me cook? Because right now I need to get this thing finished. And when I explain sometimes the why to him, and I acknowledge him in that sense, I find that he feels much more like I'm there for him, and he's less likely to go into a meltdown. Now, I'm not a perfect parent. Sometimes there is an emergency where I literally cannot give him that attention that he seeks. And yeah, and meltdowns will ensue. But another way is sometimes our son loves to pull us and take us into different rooms, or he wants to show us this and that, and it's very inconvenient. I will take the time out of what it is that I'm doing and I will give him that. And then I'll say, okay, well, I'm going to sit here for about 2 minutes, but then I got to go back to this thing that I'm doing. You're more than welcome to come with me. And those are just small ways that I practice connection with my son.
You had talked about connection being like acknowledgement, and so you mean you're actually verbally acknowledging what it is that he's after. You know that he wants you to come into the room and sit with him, and so you're just saying that.
Yeah, a lot of it is reflecting what I'm hearing back from him. This would also be in, let me use an example of, we try to really limit TV time and screen time. And right now, because my husband and I are both working from home, sometimes we do have to use it because I need to get something done, send out an email or something. And um, when we tell him, like, no more, he does get very upset about it because he could just watch TV all day long. But one of the things that I try to say is like, I know you really want to watch TV. I mean, those cartoons are so cool and they're so fun. And I totally understand. But we're done for today and we can't do anymore. So why don't we go and find something else? Let's go read a book. Or I try to offer him like one or two other alternatives, but really acknowledging him like, yeah, I understand. This is a really cool thing. And this is definitely something that I would want to do all day too. But there's a limit to what we can do. And it's really about utilizing your own family rules of, there's no perfect way. Some parents do absolutely zero screen time. Like we don't do sugar and cookies and juice and that kind of stuff. And we really try to limit certain things that he eats. And those are sometimes the battles that come up is like, he wants more sweets. He wants more TV. But that's a way through connection that we start setting some of those boundaries, but also acknowledging him that we understand why he wants these things.
And in the examples you gave, you talked about giving other options, like in the one where you were talking about cooking, you said, "Hey, do you want to come cook with me?" How do you come up with the other options if what you're feeling is kind of, oh, go away, if what you're feeling in the instant is go away, I'm busy, and you said you don't want to say that, you do want to spend it, you do want to have some connection. Yeah, how do you come up with what the other option is if it?
Yeah.
I'm just imagining at first it feels like this is not something we can compromise on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really like what's in front of me at the moment. So if I'm cooking something and like he can wash the vegetables, or he loves different, he likes to play with water. So it's literally what's in front of me that I know that he finds interesting. We have this one like junk drawer that has a lot of like different kitchen utensils. I'll pull up the little step ladder for him and be like, do you want to come look at all these different spoons? And he's next to me. And sometimes he'll say no. He's like, no, I need you to come to the front room with me. So it's like, do you want to bring your cars over here? I try to find something that he would find interesting, and we can be in the same space together while I can get my thing done. Now, sometimes if he's overtired or we've had an exceptionally challenging day, because, nobody's perfect, sometimes don't work. And sometimes like meltdowns do ensue, and just try to go with the flow and acknowledge it. Like, wow, you're really upset, or I need to really give you a snack right now. And then I try to, really help, like tune into what's here in front of me in the moment. And sometimes I will admit, like I do get exasperated. I myself like hit a threshold if I haven't had great sleep or I'm overworking. Having that patience for my son withers quite a lot. And that's something that has really come to my awareness, that in order for me to hold that space for him, for connection, you need to have patience. And so we, as parents, educators, caretakers, we really need to tune into our own needs, because we cannot show up for kids in this way when we are constantly giving. So I definitely try to balance things out by tuning into projects and things that sort of give me autonomy. So then, and then I can get also, try to get a good night's rest, try to eat well. So I can show up for my son in the way that he needs to have that sense of connection.
Just one more question about the giving options. I noticed that you're talking about giving specific options. You're not just saying, go find something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it is about the specific options that works better?
I'm going to just give an example from my own perspective, because I'm a mom. I don't work with lots of children, but I know what it works best for my son is when, if I give him one or two options of things that I know he really already likes and enjoys, it's less likely to be a battle for us. And it's not that I'm trying to avoid any sort of confrontation with my son. I just know that at his age, if I give him an infinite amount of opportunity, he doesn't really know what to do with that yet. But when I say you can have A or B, most likely he goes along with the flow and he'll say, I want B. And then it allows us to sort of move forward. So
It's interesting part of psychology that you're actually restricting options, but that's more kind of influential, or that's more convincing to put something in front of them and say, would you like this? Would you like to do this or that?
Yeah.
Than do something else amongst anything in the whole world, which requires a lot of his own. He already knows what's in his mind, which is pulling you away into the playroom.
Yeah.
Do you ever find that making time for this connection when you're busy, do you find that encourages him to come and bug you even more?
Yeah.
If you're always have something for him in a way, rather than just being, hey, go away.
One of the things that I want to emphasize is my journey is very different from my husband's. My husband just generally is a much more empathetic and patient person in general. My husband also comes from a very kind of, I will say, strict and conservative upbringing himself. And so there are certain values that he wants to instill in our son that aren't always, they're a little bit more authoritative and a little bit top down. Now, so our marriage and our family and the way that we're bringing, we really try to discuss a lot of trying to get on the same page, and we might have different ways of, showing that and creating that experience with our son. For me, because I have struggled so much with anger, it has not made me a very patient person. So it's almost like the experience with my son is a way to push myself to be much more patient, to be much more in tune with other humans. So that's something that's important to me. And so this is why, yes, he knows that he has way more leeway with me than my husband, but I'm okay with that because I'm his mom. Now, there are certain things that my husband and I discuss where, like, we definitely need to be on the same page when it comes to boundaries, what we allow, like the TV stuff, what we eat, when we eat. Those are the things, but how sometimes we connect with him are just in different ways. And I'm okay with that. One of the things that I try to do really with my son is really give him a lot of the why and explain the why. And because he does feel connected with me, I sometimes have to really explain the boundary to him. Like an example would be is my husband will put him down at nighttime, close the door, good night, we'll see you in the morning. Sometimes if he's not ready or we put him down a little early because we have to finish our work at night, he wants to stay up and he wants to play. My husband is very clear about setting that boundary. It's bedtime now. Me, I will go in there a couple of times and he definitely is like, oh, mom, I want more milk and I need this. And can you bring me my car? And I know what he's doing. But I tried to really set the boundary and say, you know what? It's almost 8:30 now. I'm going to give you these things, but now it's nighttime and now it's bedtime. And I give him a cuddle and and then I leave the room. And then usually, most of the time, he understands like, okay, like this is it. So it has taken us time to be able to communicate and work up with him. But once again, that takes a lot of patience. And sometimes on some nights, it's really, if I have a deadline, I really got to get things done. I might cut that a little bit shorter than usual. But it's not perfect, and I wouldn't want anybody who's listening to this think I have it all together. I by all means am a human too. I have my needs, and so but I really try to tune into my son's needs as well, and that takes a lot of like patience, and sometimes we just are very sharp on that.
I guess I'm hearing from you that there's a difference between being responsive and being like a pushover. You'll still have your boundaries. There's still a bedtime. But if you can spare a minute when you're cooking, then
I think that's a really great way for you to put that, because that's the difference between my husband and I. Our boundaries are similar. My sphere of boundaries is a little further out. His is a little tighter. And I feel like a lot of people, will have their own version of what they're comfortable with and what is a boundary. And by all means, I definitely believe that with things like routine, children feel very comfortable. I mean, I have 2 dogs. My dogs feel very comfortable with a routine, and I think setting certain boundaries allows at least our son to feel a sense of place. I don't think there's the boundaries that hurt us emotionally because we're not acknowledging somebody's needs and feelings. But there's a way to set boundaries where we are acknowledging the other person, but we're also letting them know like this is the limit. So I really like the way that you put that.
yeah, thanks. You were saying about we were talking before about the pre-verbal stuff and how you would communicate how you're feeling even if he's not able to have that conversation with you.
100%. One of the things I have learned, and I know other practitioners, psychologists, and educators will have a way better grasp on this, but something that I've been learning a lot since my son's been really small is about the brain and how the brain develops. Well, when children are really small, as an infant, and before they're pre-verbal, just the way that the brain is wired is what gives us a sense of calmness and connection is through touch. So if we try to talk down at a small child or an infant, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed, so they don't have rational thinking. What gets through to them is connection happens through touch and a certain way to calm them down. This is why when babies are upset, we hold them tight, and we do certain things to try to soothe them and make them feel like, hey, we're here for you. And if at around age 1.5 is really when that sort of independence started coming out with my son. And part of the biggest frustration that sometimes would lead to a meltdown is because he didn't know how to express himself. Like he was not verbal yet. And so if he can't do something or I'm not understanding what it is that he wants, he sometimes would literally go in a meltdown because he feels so frustrated with me right there in the moment. So one way that I handled that in the past, which we still exercise to this day, we just do a lot more verbal stuff now, but just really get down at his eye level. I would open up my arms, and as he was getting upset, it really just being there for him. It's like, do you want a hug? Do you want to come in for a hug? Now, what I've learned from hearing from other people, some children have a sphere where they definitely are like the touchy, feely kids, and that feels really good to them. And then some kids are like, no, I don't want to be touched right now. So my son is very much like, he's not necessarily a cuddler, but he loves to touch and hold hands with you. loves being picked up and he loves being held. And that's something that I had to figure out, getting to know my son in the beginning stages after his birth. But that's something that is one way that I was doing, expressing connection, and definitely like getting down low, not hovering over them, but getting at the eye level. And then sometimes just being like, hey, I'm here for you. I see that you really, really upset. I'm here for you. I'll give you a hug. But sometimes he just needs to ride out that emotion. And it's not saying like, don't do that, or, oh, you're okay. I mean, those are my slight bugbears about really discounting a child's experience. This is something that I learned myself, and it was a real big hump I had to get over. Of like, no, he's not okay. Just because that doesn't seem that's something that doesn't upset us, it is very upsetting to them. And so there's that piece of acknowledgement of like, hey, they're going through something. It's temporary. But when we are able to get down to their level and connect with them on a physical level, most likely it's going to be not as harsh as when we tell them to stop that, rambunctious behavior of like crying and throwing a fit and throwing things. So.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I can the like your example of when he's upset and you're saying someone's saying, oh, you're okay. That's kind of dismissive or playing down, their experience. And it's also, I've seen or have done myself where you can be over responsive. A kid gets hurt, and if everyone goes, oh my gosh, what a bad cut you have,
Yeah.
So it's,
I'm really glad
I'm hearing
that up, because that's something that my husband and I have had to work through. This is, as we're all going on our own like self-awareness journey, I definitely am aware my husband is masculine. He has a son. So there are certain things that he's pulling into his experience of like, let's not create a weak child where every single little thing is going to be upsetting him. I think it's a balance that him and I have had to really work on, like what is considered appropriate for a 2-year-old and what is not. I definitely try to acknowledge where my husband is coming through on that level. But I will say that what's more damaging in the long run is dismissing other people's emotions. Because if we can't get in touch with feeling angry or constantly being dismissed, this is what happened to me in my childhood, and I had to go through therapy where I didn't feel acknowledged. And so it has showed up as having a very aggressive personality towards others, and I had a mistrust for other people. And so for me in particular, I'm very sensitive to that, where I'm like, I almost rather overcompensate and over acknowledge, because I've seen the other side of it. And everybody's entitled to their own point of view, but that's the point of view where I come from. And those are the type of discussions that I have with my husband, as a way to really try to understand where we're coming from, and then try to find that happy medium of, being able to raise him on around the same page. And one other thing that I want to bring up that you said, I think that is really important. One of the reasons sometimes we disacknowledge an emotion of when somebody is, like a small child is upset, is it triggers our own things. So one of the things that when my son used to cry uncontrollably, without like scaring our audience a little bit too much or making people feel sad or anything like that. My brother, we had a lot of, domestic abuse in my family. And so he's 8 years older. So I grew up with witnessing my brother being beaten in front of me. So the trigger of my son crying uncontrollably were these subconscious triggers for me where I could not deal with it. So I wanted to stop the crying because it was triggering me. And those are things that we are not aware about when we get into parenthood, because those are not things that were brought onto us. And I didn't even realize, but I actually had trauma I started going and seeing a therapist because there was all these different challenges in my parenting technique that kept coming up where I wanted to run away from some of these situations. But I think that's one of the reasons we try to, extinguish some of these emotions, because we ourselves are feeling very uncomfortable with them. And I think if we want to raise resilient, independent, compassionate kids that are empathetic towards others and empathetic with themselves and having really good control of their own emotions, we have to do some of this groundwork with ourselves and where we're coming from. And sometimes that's not something that people are willing to admit or even venture into. But that's definitely been my sort of journey. And it's been really opening me up in all kinds of different ways. I would say I'm not 100% perfect yet. Sometimes those triggers still come up, but I'm aware of them and I'm able to deal with them. Like, ask my husband, like, hey, babe, I'm really feeling exasperated right now and I'm at my limit. I need you to come and step in because I myself need a timeout. So I just wanted to bring that up. It's like, not to make people feel guilty, but that is the answer of sometimes why we feel so uncomfortable with, little kids having meltdowns.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And even outside of, the tantrum or the uncontrollable crying and how it might, trigger being abused or anything like that. In my experience, it's, I think I can even just be like embarrassed for the kid, or the kid does something embarrassing and then I'm embarrassed around people. And it kind of, I think for all types of emotions, we can kind of feel them for people, or we're, especially with someone we're taking care of, there's some transference of what they're feeling to us feeling ownership for that. And that's, suddenly we're all in this, urgent situation, and things can get ugly really quick.
And a term that I literally learned a couple of months ago, which I never heard of before, but it's called holding space. So holding space is where you're acknowledging that you see an emotion that's being reflected back on you, and that transference is happening with you where it makes you feel uncomfortable. But acknowledging, like, wow, I feel uncomfortable. And that person is having an emotion and you're just allowing to stay with it. And that's called holding space. And that was sort of a mind-blowing thing for me. Those are some of the foundations of emotional intelligence. Is we're becoming much more emotionally intelligent by being able to understand that when we see somebody suffering, or when we see somebody going through, like, we have a visceral reaction sometimes through our own emotions. And the more we can practice of being able to hold space for other people, is also how we strengthen that connection just in general as human beings. That was not something that I was definitely not taught when I was a child. And those are some of the things that I'm hoping as my son gets older as I learn and get better at it, is to really teach him how to do that. Not just with me as his mom, who I'm sure I'm going to be so frustrated with him in so many levels, but also when he starts making friends with other people, when he starts, having teachers and other people in his life, is being able to hold space of what's currently going on, is such a, place of strength and power of us humans being able to relate to each other. And I think in today's world, we really, really need that. And that's something that I'm still learning about, but I find really, really fascinating.
So rather than trying to make the situation go away or to rush in and save it, holding space is about kind of sitting with someone in their pain or their darkness or whatever, and just being willing again to kind of just show up for them.
Yep.
Earlier you had said kind of, I'm here for you, which is another kind of mantra I try to keep around. As some, practicing compassion is a lot of times just showing up, holding space, sitting with someone. Those are all kind of...
Yeah. Therapists have trained to do this for a really long time. And if you have a very great therapist, they will make you feel comfortable, because what they're doing is they're holding space. They're not judging you. They're acknowledging how you're feeling. But they're not also, you notice that a therapist won't give you advice unless you ask for it. They're just there listening to you, and most of the time playing back, oh, this is what I heard you say. Um, and I think more and more parents and educators are noticing that some of those qualities don't necessarily have to be just for therapy. Those are things and practices that could be applied to literally our day to day.
We don't have to get into the subject, and we won't go on much longer. But how did you choose a type of therapist? Did you just open up the phone book, or
Question.
is there?
Yeah, it's a bit even for me, I think it's really confusing. The more and more I learn about the space, the more I learn about myself. I definitely have in the past sort of just done research, and it's really hard to tell because there's so many different methods and approaches. Um, and it all depends, what are you dealing with? Do you have like deep-seated trauma? Like deep-seated trauma would be things like, you've witnessed rape, you have been abused, you have been around alcohol and drug abuse. Like those are some really big things that require a certain approach. And then there are things like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just know that I hate everybody and everybody ticks me off. And I can't seem to hold down a job because I can't form relationships with people. So I don't have the answer. But what I do know is it's really important to ask a therapist what is their mode of what it is that they practice. What does that entail? What are some of the outcomes of it? What can you expect? And just learning and educating yourself. And then also, how does that person make you feel when you're on the phone with them? Because a lot of people, because I have been sometimes where I felt uncomfortable with somebody, and that was an indicator to me that because you're going to go so deep with somebody on a lot of this stuff, you really need to feel a sense of safety. So connection and safety is also the foundations of helping a child move through big emotions and tantrums. But it's also a foundational thing for us adults. When we don't feel connection and safety is when you are in a romantic relationship with somebody, you need to have it there in order to really be able to open up, be vulnerable, and be exposed. That's what our children are looking for from us. And that's also what a therapist should be able to make you feel off the bat. Somebody makes you feel uncomfortable, I would say that's probably not going to be the best fit for you. They might have a certain approach and a mode that might work for some people, but maybe you require a different person. And so it is all about sort of dating and feeling and trying things out before you might land on the person that might be really great for you. I've definitely been in a place where I've started with somebody and it wasn't really going anywhere, and I've switched, and you're allowed to do that as well. So I don't have the perfect answer for it, but I think it's trial and error, and it's all about do you feel safe? Do you feel connected? So yeah.
Nice. I like it. Yeah. Do you feel safe? It is a big first one. I do like coaching with people, which is just armchair psychology, and I've seen therapists also. And if I was gonna make any other recommendation beyond feeling safe, is make sure it doesn't feel too safe, because sometimes people will just gladly pay or gladly take your money, whatever side of the seat you're sitting on,
right, totally.
to just, hey, how you doing? Fine, cool, neat. It's kind of like there's a zone of discomfort that you want to be in.
I think
sometimes
clear of what it is that you are looking to get out of your experience. So most of us, if you go into therapy, you're facing a challenge. Sometimes you're aware of what that challenge is, and sometimes it's not. But really, the reason we seek therapy is because we want somebody to help us and figure out and put us on a trajectory of being able to live life in a different way. And so being able to articulate what it is that you're looking for and then asking that therapist of like, okay, so what's your approach? Like, how would we handle this? And now therapy is not like a one and done type of thing. Different modes have different approaches. Some are lengthy, some are not. And then just see what you feel comfortable with. I definitely at the moment have been exploring somatic therapies. So there's, like you said, the armchair therapy, which really goes into the psyche and understanding of like what has happened to you in the past. Where are those triggers? Where are those places where I'm just going to call it damage? Like, where's the damage? To be able to isolate like where are the areas then that we need to work on. So for me was the idea of deep physical abuse with my brother. Um, Me being ostracized in different ways throughout my childhood. And those were the two major things. And there was a couple of other things. I had to go through therapy to be able to uncover that. Like when I came in, I didn't know that that's what was, I just was an angry person. And this person was able to uncover for me, like, this is why you're angry. These are the hidden layers of why these keeps coming up and getting in the way of you being able to live the life that you want to live. Somatic therapies are, if you're very familiar with like Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, this is not going to seem foreign. But somatic therapies are going into places like breath work, gong baths, Reiki healing. It's basically working with the energy in your body. And I had my first experience like back in March. I went to LA and I went to this like amazing experience. And definitely a believer. It's a way that there's a really great book out there called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's all about how trauma and different like adverse experiences in our life basically get stored in the body. So therapy, traditional therapy is a really great way to isolate what are those triggers and traumas. And then somatic therapy is about helping you release that bottled up energy that's stored in your body through these traumas. So this is a new way that I'm starting to look beyond just, practicing this stuff with my son, going to therapy, but really trying to do the whole mind body wellness of, releasing some of the stuff, getting much more self-aware and in tune of just being a much more like whole and rounded person. So
It's beautiful. Yeah. I'm going to kind of try to get out of the conversation of psychology now, just because I know that I could go on for another hour
yeah, totally.
or 10 about that. Maybe I'll have to start another podcast about that. But if I can just summarize some of the stuff that I heard you say around getting back to getting kids to listen. But I do really appreciate how, it starts with ourselves. And if we've got all kinds of stuff, and we all do, we all have stuff we need to process and figure out in order to show up the way we want to show up in an authentic way. Therapy is a great place to start looking at that. You talked about getting on your son's level when you're talking to him,
Mm-hmm.
which I love because you're just establishing that kind of being on his level. I mean, it's very important for anybody. I mean, I know when I talk to a guy who's a foot taller than me, it feels different,
Yeah.
So it's really, that's universal among people, I think. And then just acknowledging what it is that he is after, his emotional state or what he wants to do. Just saying it back is a way of acknowledging that and creating connection with him.
Mm-hmm.
And giving options. You're saying, I see you want to do that. Sounds awesome. And how about washing these vegetables? Giving a couple specific options that give him some choice and also redirect him into a space that you would rather him be. And I also like that you're explaining why. You're also explaining your own emotions, even if even if he's not able to speak that back. Just kind of providing context that you're hoping he'll kind of grow into and grasp. And I find that to be true too. The explaining why. Sometimes the reason doesn't even need to make sense, but just to know that the other person has a reason is a big deal. So those are great. It sounds like you've done a lot of homework for someone who wasn't working with kids professionally and has one young child. Can you share some of your favorite resources?
100%. The book that explains this really well is Daniel Siegel's Whole Brain Child. I'm sure multiple people have mentioned this book.
It's probably number one of the recommendations I've heard on this podcast.
Yes, it's a really great book because he gets down to the scientific levels of what happens in the brain, and how certain reactions and certain triggers basically create the behavior. And so on a neurological level, it's how we can respond and being able to help the child move through some of these challenging behaviors. The other book, like I mentioned, is The Body Keeps the Score, is a really good one. There's for growth mindset is she's the pioneer woman. It's literally called Growth Mindset, and her what do you call it? Her name escapes me now.
Carol Dweck?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say the other woman who wrote Grit. But yes, it's Carol Dweck. That's a really good one. I would say the two books that really changed my perspective that were sort of at the top of the pyramid was Daniel Siegel's book, and then of Whole Brain Child, and then The Growth Mindset. Those, I feel like if you read those two, you're going to have such a good, and I listen to them on Audible, by the way. So if you don't have time to read, but like you listen to a chapter here and there, some of them are very dense. So like you need to pace it. But just understanding those two books, you're going to understand the brain. You're going to understand psychology on a very like digestible level. And it just gives you a little bit more insights to yourself. And then, the children that you work with or take care of. And I will say, like, the thing that I just really want to end on this is the reason I wanted to talk about connection and some of the examples I gave is that I really feel like every one of us are sort of on a journey, whether you're an educator or you are a parent, is we have become so disconnected from ourselves. And that's why we have some of these challenges. And I feel like children are in our lives because they're forcing us, if you're willing to pay attention to it, to reconnect with ourselves, our own needs, so we can show up for them and connect with them. And I think this is how we start changing society to be much more connected and in tune with each other. And that is the gift I feel like my son has given me. And I've just, I've been really leaning very hard into it. So
yeah,
it's been an absolute pleasure here, being able to speak with you on this.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Yeah, kids are by nature really vulnerable, and that brings out our own feelings about being vulnerable. And usually that's a very uncomfortable feeling for us.
Yeah.
For more on that, I would recommend Brene Brown's work.
Yes, 100%.
And
yeah,
I appreciate you doing the same, being open and vulnerable and sharing about your issues and how you've addressed those challenges. Where can we learn more about you and what you're up to?
So right now I'm just on Instagram. It's the symbol @ and then TANOS_MOM. So Tanos mom. And I literally am just on Instagram sharing my own experience, the things that inspire me, and the things that I'm going through on a daily basis.
That's great. I think that's great. Learning out loud.
That's right. And no, it's been wonderful to connect with other people. I'm connected with all kinds of psychologists and therapists, and I learn from the community just as much. I'm always learning about new books. So if this is a new space for anybody, Instagram's such a great way to connect with other people and really start learning, and sharing your own experience of what it is that you're going through.
Yeah, I'm just figuring it out myself. So I'll see you out there in the interweb. Agata, thanks for your time today. Thanks for sharing everything.
Thank you so much,
really
James.
appreciate
It's
you
been a pleasure.
coming on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll let you get back to your toddler in action. And to all of our listeners, thank you for being with us. It's we're trying to get better all the time, and we appreciate any feedback. And just want to say thanks, and hope everybody stays safe. See you next time. All right, bye.